Morning, good afternoon, good evening. 18,000 to get title deeds in Epworth. What is song and dance? It was last year's elections. Zanu PF made a big issue of issuing title deeds to the people in Epworth. Epworth is a suburb, a high-density suburb, but it's sprouted in Chitungwiza. And those people who were living there had no title deeds at all. It is ironic that the land is the one thing that majority of Black Africans in Zimbabwe today will be able to own something of value that they could own for themselves. There is some truth in saying that the Liberation War was fought over the land. Because before independence, Blacks were not allowed to own any land at all. If you're going to have any title deeds as a Black person, you were lucky to get title deeds to the little patch of land on which your matchbox house stood in the urban centers, in the so-called high-density suburbs. Everywhere else, Blacks did not own any land. In the rural areas, Blacks did not own the land. The land was communally owned. It was tribal trust land. It was held in trust by the regime, by the government. And the chiefs and the headmen were the local administrators. So yes, the War of Liberation was fought over land, the right to own land. It is ironic that after independence, nothing changed. Nothing. In fact, before independence, the late John Robertson, he was an economist and a banker, gave Ian Smith a paper in which he was arguing that if Blacks were allowed to own land, the title deeds to the land on which their mud hovel was built, that would enhance economic growth of the country. They would be able to go to the banks and get loans to build decent houses on their little patch of land. Just as the urban few were able to buy and build the matchbox houses that sprouted all over in the urban centers. They had title deeds. They could build that matchbox and know that in 10 years, 5 years, whatever, they can sell it and recover something from it. Ian Smith rejected the plan for no other reason than that he did not want to give blacks ownership of the land, because by empowering them economically, they would, the next step, be seeking political empowerment too. They would want the vote. D.N. Smith was not prepared to do that. Blacks were not allowed to vote, did not have a vote. And so the plan was shelved. After independence, John Robertson gave the same plan to the late Robert Gabriel Mugabe. And guess what? He rejected the plan for exactly the same reasons that D.N. Smith had rejected it. Mugabe did not want the blacks to own land, because that would have undermined political power for Zanu PF. So all this fuss about we fought the land and we're going to redistribute the lands and so forth was all smokes and mirrors. When Mugabe started seizing the farms, white-owned farms, beginning of 2000, the seized farms were given mostly to the Zanu PF ruling elite. Yes, they were given the land, the farms, and the title deeds. His own daughter, when she was divorcing her husband, revealed that she had no fewer than 12 farms whose land acreage was put together, was big enough for Lesotho to fit in, or Belgium. And she had title deeds to all that land. And yet the regime still refused to give title deeds to urban dwellers in Epworth and other high-density suburbs. And is now making a big song and dance about granting these title deeds. And guess what? The headline is saying 18,000 are going to get title deeds. But it turns out that most of the people in Epworth who were promised title deeds, all they are getting actually is an offer letter, which is of no value at all. It can easily be withdrawn, as has happened to some of the blacks who were resettled in some of the seized farms. They were never given title deeds, while Mugabe and others got title deeds and the ruling elite got title deeds for the farms. They were resettled in these farms and were given offer letters, which the regime has, on a number of occasions, withdrawn for whatever reasons. You get the letter, the offer letter today, and tomorrow you may be told it was issued in error. That's it. The piece of land is offered to somebody else. And of course, no bank has ever granted anybody, as far as I know, any loans on the basis on offer letter, because they know that offer letter can be withdrawn at the drop of a hat. So all these 18,000 who are getting title deeds, they've waited a year, and so far all they ever got was an offer letter. And that's a big song and dance. 44 years after independence, the regime is still toying with the people's right to own property. The regime is like a mouse toying, it's like a cat toying with a mouse. Zanu PF claims that the party strongholds are the rural areas. This is where the poorest of the poor in the country live. And we are talking about here the 18,000 to get title deeds. These are in the urban centers. There is not even any debate on when the people in the rural areas will get title deeds. The regime considers them people in the rural area is strong, and it would like to maintain its political stranglehold on them by denying them ownership to the one thing that would be of the greatest value to them, land. Political power is now being exercised in the same way that the whites did. Nothing has changed. I think this is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. The nation went through a bitter war of independence, only to replace the white oppressors with the new black ruling elite, who turned out to be just as oppressive as the whites. If the rural people were given title deeds to, say, 3 or 4 hectares of land on which their rural home is built, I believe you would see many people build a decent home, house, than what we see in the countryside right now. They will have the confidence to know that even if I should decide, or my children should decide they want to move from here, they can move and recover something from it. But at the present moment, because they don't own any land, the headmen can tell them to move, and they will have no choice but to move. You do not invest. You don't even have the confidence to plant fruit trees in your yard, because you know you could be asked to move. Indeed, anyone who has lived in the rural areas know that the last thing you want to do is to make your neighbors envious. If the headman should envy where your homestead is, you can bet that they will put you under enormous pressure to move, so that he or his relative can take over. So we are holding back the country's economic development for the sake of keeping Zanu PF in power. The whole nation is being sacrificed so that Zanu PF can retain its stranglehold on power. If there's one thing that the rural folk would value, way above the right to a meaningful vote, it is the right to own the land, even if it is a postage size stamp piece of land. Having a piece of paper that says this is yours will mean a lot to these people. Why the regime continues to drag its feet over giving people the ownership of the land, take us belief, at least to those who do not understand it. But the truth of the matter is, Zanu PF knows that as a regime, it has completely failed, and the only way it can retain power is by holding the nation to ransom. And its biggest victim of those it's holding to ransom are the poor. There's no doubt, of course, that Zanu PF was offering people, promising people these title deeds in Epworth for the sake of enticing them to vote for the party. And maybe a few will get title deeds. Then the rest will get these letter offers, which they will be reminded would be withdrawn if the party does not win the election. And so this will continue to be dangled in front of these people. As a way of holding those people to ransom. We should address this issue of the land once and once for all. The right to own land, the right to own the piece of land on which a homestead is built should not be negotiable, should not be a political gimmick, negotiating, which can be traded in and withdrawn willy-nilly by those in power. It is absolutely ridiculous that 44 years after independence, we're still talking of millions of our people who are not allowed to own anything, who own absolutely nothing. And of course, denying those millions of people a meaningful vote has been achieved because these people are destitute. They have no economic power and therefore then cannot claim political power. It will be a pity if this issue of denying the people the ownership of the land drags on for any more, for another 10 years, 5 years even. This is absolutely an outrage. The right to own property should now be considered on par with the right to a meaningful vote. In fact, for the rural people, you give them the right to own land. That will be the stepping stone to guaranteeing their right to a meaningful vote. Giving them the right to a meaningful vote when they don't own the land will only make it easy for regimes like Zanu PF to continue to hold those people to ransom. The rural people today are no more than medieval serfs, beholden to the overbearing landlords. Zanu PF ruling elite and their operatives and their proxies in the form of chiefs and headmen. The right to own land must now be on par with the right to a meaningful vote. Thank you very much for listening. And we'll meet again